Most people think the great financial milestone is $100,000. Some think it is $1 million. Some think it is the first time the account balance looks large enough to impress another person. I have lived long enough to tell you that most people are looking at the wrong number. The first number that truly changes a life is often not glamorous at all. It is $10,000. Now, I am not going to insult you by pretending $10,000 makes you rich. It does not. It will not buy freedom in the grand dramatic sense. It will not let you retire. It will not make you untouchable. It will not fix poor habits all by itself. But it does something that a much larger number often fails to do. It changes the internal relationship between you and money. That is where wealth really begins. Most people think money changes life when it becomes externally impressive. I think money changes life much earlier than that, when it becomes internally stabilizing. $10,000 is often the first time money stops being nothing but a monthly emergency response system and starts becoming a piece of quiet strength. That is why I care about it so much. When people hear the number, they often react in one of two foolish ways. One group says 10,000 is nothing. The other says 10,000 is impossible. The first group is usually repeating a social media script that taught them to feel embarrassed by ordinary progress. The second group is usually living in such a fragile financial structure that the number feels like it belongs to some other species. I have no interest in either reaction. I am interested in the arithmetic and the psychology. And in both categories, 10,000 matters far more than the culture likes to admit. The first reason it matters is brutally simple. It breaks the spell. A person living in the 3-digit or 4-digit range often spends years believing that saving serious money is something other people do. The paycheck comes in, bills go out, a little remains, sometimes nothing remains, sometimes a small emergency arrives, and even the little that remained disappears. This happens enough times, and the brain learns a very bad lesson. The lesson is not that saving is hard. That would be correct. The lesson becomes that saving is not for me. That is the poisonous version. Once a person begins believing that real saving belongs to other households, other jobs, other zip codes, other personalities, or other kinds of luck, he stops trying with full seriousness. He may still say the right things. He may still promise himself he will do better. He may still watch videos and nod at good advice. But beneath all of that sits a quiet, private conclusion. This does not really happen for people like me. That conclusion costs fortunes. $10,000 shatters that conclusion. It is the first time the account becomes a visible argument against your old identity. 5 digits instead of 4. The left side of the comma changes. That sounds childish to say out loud. It is not childish to feel. Human beings respond to thresholds. We always have. The first apartment, the first promotion, the first passport stamp, the first child, the first house key, the first time your life no longer looks exactly like the old version of itself. $10,000 is one of those moments. It is not magical in the mystical sense. It is magical in the human sense. It tells you that what used to be theoretical is now observable. You did not merely say you wanted to save. You saved. You did not merely admire discipline. You used it. You did not merely wish for a different relationship with money. You built the first hard proof that such a relationship is possible. That is a much bigger deal than people who grew up with buffers realize. I want you to think carefully about what has to be true for an ordinary person to save his way to 10,000 while still paying for life at the same time. He must have fought his own impulses at least a little. He must have survived some wants. He must have said no in rooms where saying yes would have been easier. He must have tolerated a slower kind of gratification than the culture encourages. He must have learned, even if imperfectly, how to keep a little water in the bucket while daily life kept trying to punch holes through it. That deserves respect. Because once a person does that once, he is no longer starting from fantasy. He is starting from evidence. Evidence is a far more powerful teacher than inspiration. You can inspire people for a day. Evidence can change their identity. And identity matters in finance more than most experts admit. A person who sees himself as someone who cannot hold money behaves one way. A person who has seen his own account hit 10,000 behaves another. The world outside may not care very much yet. Your inner life, that is why I call 10,000 the first real threshold. Not because the world bows, because the mind bends. Now, the second reason it matters is one that people talk about carelessly and therefore misunderstand compounding. Everybody loves the phrase, very few respect what it actually means in the early years. Compound interest is one of the great truths in money, but truths can still be badly marketed. The public often hears compounding discussed as though it were some sort of mystical force that begins changing everything the moment you open an investment account with a few dollars in it. That is not how it feels in real life. In real life, compounding whispers long before it speaks. That is the problem. A person invests $100 and earns 10. Good, correct. Healthy, also emotionally tiny. A person invests 1,000 and earns 70. Fine, better. Still not the sort of thing that changes how the month feels. This is why people quit. Not because compounding is false, because the early stage is too quiet for the emotional appetite modern life has trained into them. $10,000 is where compounding begins to make itself heard. Not loudly enough to replace your job. Not loudly enough to make you arrogant, but loudly enough that you can finally feel that the machine exists. That matters enormously. If you save $1,000 a year and earn roughly 7%, the first 10,000 may take more than 7 years. Then something interesting happens. The next 10,000 does not take the same amount of time because the first pile has finally become large enough to work beside you rather than only beneath you. This is the handoff everybody should study at first. You are doing almost all the work. Later, the pile begins helping. That help is still modest around 10,000. I am not here to romanticize it, but it is no longer invisible. And the moment the help becomes visible, discipline becomes easier. That is one of the deepest truths in all of finance. The hardest stage is the stage before your behavior is producing enough evidence to keep your behavior emotionally supported. 10,000 is often where that begins changing. This is one reason people speak so often about my own net worth curve. They say almost all of my wealth came later in life. Fine, that is true enough. But the late curve only existed because the early machine was left alive long enough to become ridiculous. The public sees the giant hill at the end. It almost never respects the long, quiet runway that made the hill possible. I want you to respect the runway. $10,000 is part of the runway. It is the first time the runway stops feeling imaginary. And once a person understands that his money can earn money, not just in a textbook but in his own account, he begins seeing choices differently. Which brings me to the third reason the number matters. Confidence. I do not mean fake confidence. I do not mean social media confidence. I do not mean the kind of borrowed swagger that people get from one lucky trade or one inflated screenshot. I mean quieter confidence, the kind that changes the posture of your decision making. The average person has very little idea how few people are truly buffered. We live in an age of financial theater. The internet makes everybody look richer than they are. The cars are financed. The vacations are sometimes paid off over months. The apartment is stretching the budget. The investor may be talking loudly about wealth while carrying revolving balances at an interest rate that would make a loan shark blush. The entrepreneur may be one bad month away from panic. The high earner may have more lifestyle than net worth. The costumes are excellent. The balance sheets are often weak. This is why 10,000 matters so much. It is not because it turns you into a millionaire. It is because it quietly puts you ahead of a startling number of people who look wealthier than you. The average American salary is often cited somewhere in the mid-$60,000 range. Fine. That number sounds healthy until you study what remains after taxes, rent, groceries, transportation, insurance, and all the little leaks of ordinary life. The gap between what people earn and what they can actually retain is much smaller than their outward lives suggest. That is why four-digit life is so common. People are getting paid. They just are not escaping. So when you reach 10,000, you have done more than accumulate money. You have escaped the fourth-digit trap. That changes the way you look at yourself. And once you start believing I can do this, the next goals stop feeling like stories other people tell. 25,000 begins to look possible. 50 begins to look like math rather than mythology. 100 becomes something that may still feel distant but no longer belongs entirely to another class of human being. That is a major psychological shift. I do not think the personal finance industry respects psychology nearly enough. It talks constantly about percentages, rules, and account types. Good, those things matter. But if a person still feels like an outsider to the whole game, then even correct advice lands weakly. 10,000 is one of the first moments when the outsider can begin feeling like an insider to his own life. That is worth more than people. The fourth reason is the one most people understand first because it is the easiest to touch: emergencies. I have always thought the average household dramatically underestimates how much of life is simply the management of interruption. The furnace does not care that you were planning to be disciplined this month. The car does not care that you were about to start investing more aggressively. The dog does not care. The roof does not care. The deductible does not care. Children certainly do not care. Life interrupts. That is one of its main hobbies. The poor household experiences each interruption as a moral event, not just a cost, a destabilization, a story about what must now be sacrificed, borrowed, delayed, sold, or resented. This is exhausting. A person living with $3,000 or less often experiences a single $2,000 surprise as though life itself just changed tone. In a real way, it did. Because the margin was too thin to absorb the hit without emotional violence. 10,000 does not eliminate bad luck. It makes most bad luck survivable. That is a very different thing. Most emergencies ordinary people face are not $50,000 catastrophes. They are 1,000, 2,000, ugly, unpleasant, irritating, sometimes painful, but not civilization, ending if cash exists. That is the key. If cash exists, a meaningful reserve turns many crises back into inconveniences. The event still happens. The stress still exists. But it does not drag debt, shame, panic, and high interest rescue products into the room with it. That difference changes everything. I have tracked my own financial life for decades. The biggest surprise expenses are rarely cheap, but they are also rarely apocalyptic. What destroys households is not always the size of the event. It is the absence of a buffer. Without a buffer, even modest blows become spirals. With a buffer, even unpleasant blows remain bounded. $10,000 is the first time that boundedness becomes real for many people. The numbers support this more than the culture does. A shocking number of Americans still cannot cover even a $1,000 emergency from cash. That means a person with $10,000 is not merely solvent. He is living in a different emotional climate. The public keeps wanting grand wealth. Grand wealth is lovely, but modest resilience changes a life sooner. That is what this number buys. Now, the fifth reason is subtler, and, in my view, more valuable over the long run. Choice quality. They are panic negotiations disguised as shopping. You buy the cheapest shoes, not because they are the best value over time, but because your current cash position does not permit a longer horizon. You buy the cheapest food, not because you do not understand quality, but because the present is louder than the future. You take the weak deal, the weak job, the weak financing, the weak apartment, the weak insurance option, because weak options are often what fragility can afford. This is not always stupidity. It is compression. Fragile people buy low-quality answers because the timeline of their cash requires them to think in shallow increments. 10,000 begins changing the quality of the questions you can ask. Instead of asking, what is the cheapest thing I can survive with, you begin asking, what is the best value? That is one of the most important transitions in money. Best value and lowest price are not the same thing. A pair of shoes that lasts years and protects your body may be better value than the cheapest pair. Even if the cheaper pair flatters your account for one afternoon, better food may be better value than the cheapest calories if it protects your energy, your health, and your future costs. A stronger laptop, a stronger chair, a stronger work setup, a stronger tool, these may all be better value if they strengthen your earning power. Fragility cannot always think this way because the near term is too loud. Buffett changes that. 10,000 does not make you extravagant. It gives you room to become less stupidly cheap. That is valuable. The public confuses prudence with minimizing immediate outflow. I prefer a different definition. Prudence means preserving long-term strength. Sometimes that means buying the cheaper option. Sometimes it means paying more to stop paying twice. Sometimes it means passing on both and buying nothing. But you cannot think clearly enough to distinguish those cases when every purchase feels like a threat. That is why I say 10,000 changes the quality of decisions, not just the quantity of money. Now we come to the sixth reason. It unlocks the first truly meaningful investment choices. Before 10,000, most investing behavior is psychologically fragile. A person with 2,000 to his name may technically invest some fraction of it. Good. I would rather see someone begin than never begin. But let us be adults about scale. If you are investing $100 and earning 10%, the $10 of gain is mathematically correct and emotionally tiny. That is not an insult. It is arithmetic. 10,000 changes the feeling of investing because now the account is large enough that real actions can be taken without every movement feeling symbolic. Now, a Roth IRA contribution can feel real. Now, index fund purchases feel meaningful. Now, a side business can be funded without turning survival itself into the bet. Now, the account has enough gravity that when you move money into productive assets, you can actually feel the difference between cash sitting still and capital beginning to work. That feeling matters. People underestimate how important it is to watch your own money begin behaving as an employee rather than as a passive object. That is when the ownership mindset starts taking root. Before that, investing can feel like a moral duty or a financial hobby. Around 10,000, it begins feeling like infrastructure. And once investing feels like infrastructure, people behave differently. They stop thinking only in terms of spending and start thinking in terms of deployment. That is a more serious mindset. Now, I want to say something slightly harsh because it matters. A great many people never get this far, not because the number itself is impossible, but because they keep interrupting the process every time life offers them a reason. That sounds respectable. The vacation because I worked hard. The upgrade because this is who I am now. The move because I deserve better. The purchase because it will make me more productive. The family asked because I could not say no. The emergency that was not really an emergency, but simply a poor definition of the word 10,000 forces an issue. Do you want a number in an account or a new identity? Because if you get there once and then immediately spend it down for reasons that flatter your present self, you were never building a floor. You were collecting a reward. That is a dangerous confusion. 10,000 only changes your life if it becomes a base, not a trophy, a base. The floor beneath which you do not casually fall. Once the floor exists, everything above it can be assigned more intelligently. Part goes to true emergency protection. Part goes to long-term investment. Part may go to carefully chosen options, skills, or better life choices. But the base remains. That is what makes the number powerful. Without that rule, the number is just a brief photograph. With that rule, it becomes structural. The seventh reason may be the one least discussed and most important. Financial anxiety begins to loosen its grip. This is not a poetic phrase. It is neurological. Stress narrows thinking. Scarcity shortens time horizons. A person who feels one bad week away from trouble starts behaving like a person whose future is collapsing toward the present. That makes him reactive. It makes him prone to choosing relief over strategy. It makes long-term wealth building very difficult. because long-term wealth building often asks for calm decisions made under conditions of delayed reward. A frantic nervous system is not built for delayed reward. 10,000 begins buying back mental range, not total peace. Let us not exaggerate, but range. The constant background hum of what if starts quieting down, not vanishing. Quieting, a person with no reserve hears every phone buzz as a possible demand. A person with 10,000 can begin hearing the same sound with less dread. That matters because when dread falls, cognition improves, you think more clearly. You negotiate better. You see opportunities you previously dismissed because your brain did not have enough free space to examine them. You become less likely to borrow stupidly, less likely to sell under pressure, less likely to cling to a bad boss because every gap in income now sounds like death. In a very real sense, $10,000 buys back mental bandwidth. That is one of the highest return things money can do. People talk about interest rates. Fine. Show me the interest rate on reduced panic. Show me the yield on sleeping better. Show me the compounding effect of a mind no longer trapped in low-level crisis. Those returns are difficult to chart and impossible to ignore once felt. This is also where a person often moves from scarcity mindset toward something healthier. I do not mean fake abundance language, the sort of nonsense where people repeat slogans instead of doing arithmetic. I mean a quieter transition. Before the reserve, money feels like something that can only disappear. After the reserve, money begins feeling like something that can be directed. That is a different relationship. One is defensive, the other strategic. One says, do not lose. The other says, what can I build? That shift is the seed of every larger milestone that comes later. 25,000 grows better from that mindset than from panic. 50 grows better, 100 grows better. The first 10,000 is where many people stop seeing money only as a limiting factor, and that is why life changes. Not because the number is large, because the relationship is different. Now, if you do not have 10,000 yet, I do not want you walking away from this with discouragement. I want the opposite. I want you to understand what the number really is. It is not an internet flex. It is not a millionaire cosplay starter kit. It is not something to compare socially. It is the first meaningful proof that you are no longer only being dragged by money. You are beginning to direct it. That is beautiful. But it requires seriousness. You do not get there by admiring the idea. You get there by building a gap between income and expenses, then refusing to let life automatically colonize the gap. That is hard. The average salary in America may sound decent on paper, but once taxes and necessities arrive, the monthly savings room can become smaller than people admit. That is why discipline matters so much, because the climb to 10,000 is not usually won by one dramatic event. It is won by repeated ordinary restraint. One canceled upgrade, one paid down debt, one automatic transfer, one smaller lease, one extra work project, one side income stream, one less stupid purchase, one more month of not breaking the floor. That is how it happens. And if you can do that for long enough to hit 10,000, you deserve more than a pat on the back. You deserve a new standard for yourself. That is the real gift. The standard rises. Once you have seen yourself do it, you cannot honestly go back to saying it belongs only to other people. Now the work changes. Protect the floor. Invest above it. Let compounding grow louder. Use the new calm wisely. Do not turn relief into recklessness. Do not let a milestone become a shopping signal. Do not mistake the first real layer of strength for arrival. Keep going. The first 10,000 does not finish the game. It changes the player. That is why I think it matters more than 100,000 for many people. 100,000 may impress the outside world more. 10,000 changes the inside world first, and when the inside world changes, the outer numbers eventually have a much better chance of following. That, as a threshold, the point where money stops feeling like nothing but pressure and begins, for the first time, to feel like leverage. That is the moment worth respecting. that is the moment worth building toward. And once you get there, do not worship the number. Use it, stand on it. Let it become the first floor under a life that no longer has to shake every time the month does.